Hello everyone and welcome to Plot Twists. So today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up. I know it's a little late. I've been putting this off mostly because I read a ridiculous number of books last month and I knew it was going to be a lot to talk about, so here we are. But it's getting too late in the month, can't put it off any longer. I've got to get this finished. So my wrap-up formula is going to change just a little bit. I have started collecting book stats, so I'm going to start each wrap-up with that, and then we'll move into all of the books I read and all the usual stuff. So, some book stats to start with. I read 15 books in January, which is by and large the most I've ever read in a month. I think before this my highest number had been 6. So I almost tripled my previous high, which is insane. I read 5,326 pages, which comes out to about 130 pages a day, which fulfills my goal of reading at least 100 pages a day, which is great. Of the 15 books that I read, 11 of them were full-length novels. I read 1 novella, 1 short story, and 2 manga. 10 of those books I read in print, 2 books I read were digital, and 3 of them were audiobooks. In terms of genres, I read 1 general fiction book, 2 sci-fi, 2 mystery crime books, 2 romance, and 8 fantasy books. No surprises there. And in terms of star ratings, I rated 5 books 4-star reads, 4 books 4.5-star reads, and 6 books 5-star reads, which gives me an average of about 4.5 stars. I do think I am rating books a little too leniently, so going forward I am going to try to rate things a little more harshly, depending on how I really feel about it, but for now this is what we've got. So those are my book stats. Moving into the books that I read this month. So at the very beginning of the month, I finished Red, White, and Royal Blue, which I talked about in my December wrap-up. So if you want to see more about my thoughts, you can go ahead and click the link above. But overall, I loved this book. I rated it 5 stars, and I can't wait to read it again. The next book that I read in January was the novelization of Dear Evan Hansen. I really enjoyed this. The musical is one of my favorite modern musicals, and it was good to read about the context that happens between the songs. It made a lot of things make more sense. I don't know that I would have appreciated it outside of the context of the musical though, so if you're not a Broadway kind of person, I probably wouldn't recommend it, but I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in January was Tricksters Choice by Tamora Pierce. This is a YA fantasy book that centers around our main character, Allie. She is the daughter of an extremely famed champion that I actually found out from doing more research is the centerpiece of Tamora Pierce's earlier novels in this world, which is super interesting, and I might pick them up after I finish this duology. But the basic plot of the book is she really wants to become a spy for the kingdom, and her parents are not on board. Her dad is a spy, and it's a very dangerous profession, clearly, and they don't want her involved with it at all. So she kind of goes out of her way to do something a little risky that she thinks will prove to her parents she could be a spy, and as a result ends up captured by pirates and sold into slavery. And that's basically the premise of the book, is her figuring out how to escape from her captors. She is visited by a god who asks her to protect two young noblewomen for the summer, who the god thinks their lives are in danger. And he says that if she can manage to do that, he will immediately send her home. And that's basically the whole plot of this book. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It was kind of slow to start. And it does take a little while for the main character to be kind of interesting, in my opinion. But by about a quarter of the way through the book, I was pretty invested, and I was ready to see what happened next. It's also not a long book, so it's a pretty easy read. I rated this 4.5 stars. The next book that I read was Princess of Thorns by Stacey J. This is a Sleeping Beauty retelling in which the Princess Aurora character is like a savior for this particular society. And her mother is killed early on. At the beginning of this story, her brother has been captured and by the evil queen, you know, the Maleficent character. And this entire book is about her going off to attempt to save her brother. She ends up running into a prince of a rivaling kingdom, and she tells him that she is her brother, to get him to kind of help her along with this quest. The young prince's goal is to marry Princess Aurora, and he has some pretty interesting reasons behind that. So that creates some interesting dynamics, because obviously he doesn't know that the person that he's traveling with is the person that he says he's going to marry. The world in this one is pretty interesting. The Maleficent type character is heavily involved with some giants, which creates an interesting twist to the story. And there is a pretty big plot twist at the end that made it pretty interesting. Overall, it was definitely not one of my favorite fairy tale retellings, but it was still pretty good. I rated this 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read this month was Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. This is actually the first time I've ever read this book, and I read it as part of the Scooby-Doo Readathon. I remember previously attempting to read this book and being so irritated with Percy Jackson as a character that I couldn't continue. I did force myself to power through this, and I'm really glad I did, because it's a really, really enjoyable story. I understand why everybody raves about how good this is. Rick Riordan's writing is incredible. The gods he introduces are interesting, dynamic, relatable, fun. My opinion about Percy Jackson still hasn't really changed. I still think he's an extremely annoying character, but I think the rest of the story makes up for it enough that it's completely worth it. I actually ended up rating this 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I plan to start reading Sea of Monsters tomorrow, so that should be part of my February wrap-up. The next book that I read in January was Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This I read as part of the Cosmere Crab-Along, and I did do a full review on Elantris that I'll link up above. Overall, I really enjoyed Elantris. I rated it 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read in January was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is a reread for me that I will be working my way through the series throughout this year so that I can read Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes while it's fresh in my mind. Overall, I enjoyed my reread. I rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The first time I read this through, I was very much a Team Gale kind of person. So rereading it, it was interesting to see if my opinions have changed. And I think I'm still primarily Team Gale, but I definitely don't hate Peeta as much as I did the first read through. If you're unfamiliar, this story centers around our main character, Katniss, who lives in a society in which there is a central government run by the capital, and then there are 12 outlying districts who basically all work to support this capital. At one point in their past, there was an uprising, and as a result, the capital every year forces each district to send 2 children between the ages of 12 and 18 to participate in the Hunger Games, in which they make them literally fight to the death. This is chosen through a lottery-based system. Every eligible child between 12 and 18 gets their name entered once, and you can have your name entered multiple times in exchange for extra food for your family. So there's a lot of kids in some of the outlying districts that are entered multiple times. The main character, I think, explains that she's been entered some 30 plus times. Anyway, so this book is about her experiences participating in these Hunger Games. On a reread, I did notice that Joanna Mason is referenced in one of the beginning chapters of this book, so that was really interesting. As she's a character that's mentioned later on in the series, and I liked that it's clear that Suzanne Collins was planning on, you know, some of the future things as early as the beginning. Overall, I enjoyed my reread. The next book that I read this month was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. There is literally not enough words to explain how much I loved this book. I do think I'm going to create an entire book review because I loved this book so much. I have already recommended this to 3 different people I'm close to and asked them to read it. It's incredible. So the story centers around Monique, who is a reporter who is given the opportunity to write the tell-all story for Evelyn Hugo, who is a Hollywood starlet who became super popular in the 50s. While the story is somewhat about Monique, it's more or less written as a biography of Evelyn Hugo, being told from the perspective of Evelyn Hugo. This particular book is split into sections based on the husband that Evelyn is married to at the time, and you get to watch her progress from a 15-year-old all the way through to the end of her life. You also get to see how some of the information that was presented to the public in this story previously is completely false, or a super exaggeration of the truth, or kind of a misleading statement, and then she kind of explains what was really going on behind the scenes. The representation in this book, I also think, is really exceptional. Overall, I think this is going to be one of the best books I read in 2021, and it's the beginning of February. I literally can't say enough good things about this book. If there was a 6-star rating, this would be it. 5 out of 5 stars. Incredible. If you haven't picked it up, I highly recommend it. And if you have picked it up and want to talk about it, feel free to message me on here or on Instagram. I literally can't say enough good things about this book. The next book that I read in January was Dooku, Jedi Lost. This is chronologically one of the first books in the current Star Wars canon, centering around the origins of Count Dooku. This is told through the perspective of This is told through a movie script, which is really interesting. I don't think I've ever read anything, I mean some plays, but never anything specifically intended as a movie script. It was easy to read. The characters are familiar and relatable, interesting. I really liked the plot, and I liked the progression of Dooku over the course of his life. I also really like that this story is very gray, in that the Jedi don't even feel, I mean, they're definitely, this story is very gray in that there is a lot of moral questions over the course of this story. There are definitely some things that the Jedi do that can definitely be perceived as not necessarily good. And I really liked that. I feel like Star Wars, especially the original trilogy, is very black and white, and I feel like that's just not realistic. So having a story that felt very gray, like, you know, there's not necessarily one right answer to everything, was really enjoyable to read. And Dooku's progression as a character was also really interesting. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I am pretty excited to pick up the next book, which is Master and Apprentice. This story, as part of it, talks about Dooku training Qui-Gon Jinn and Master and Apprentice is about Qui-Gon Jinn training Obi-Wan Kenobi. So it's basically like watching, you know, 4 generations of Jedi, because the beginning of this is about Yoda training Dooku. So I'm really excited to read more of that. It's really interesting. Overall, I rated this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the last full-length novel that I read in January was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. I read Six of Crows, I think almost 2 years ago, and I was not super impressed. I know that this is one of the internet's favorite Leigh Bardugo books, this duology, but after Six of Crows, I really wasn't sure that I wanted to continue. I did end up picking up Crooked Kingdom, so I obviously was going to read it. And after reading this one, I now understand the hype. I kind of want to reread Six of Crows at this point because maybe my perspective has changed, but I really enjoyed the characters in this story. This kind of shied away from the heist plot of the beginning, but still has a lot of those same, like, heist elements, if that makes any sense. The character development in this book was also really exceptional. I think by the end of the book, Matthias was one of my favorite characters. And I feel like I could read about him forever. Overall, I did rate this 5 out of 5 stars. And if you haven't picked up the Six of Crows duology, I highly recommend it. Okay, and the last 4 things that I read this month. I read volumes 3 and 4 of the Death Note manga. This takes place in a world in which there are these gods of death called Shinigami who are connected to a literal notebook in which you can write in and kill somebody off. There's a lot more intricacy to it than that, but that's the basic idea. So the main character gets one of these notebooks and starts killing off criminals, evil people, that kind of thing. And the basic premise of the manga is that it centers around the police's attempts to catch whoever this person is, and the main character's, like, goal to not be caught by the police. This is the first serious manga I've ever read, and I'm really, really enjoying it. Every once in a while, a silly anime manga is really enjoyable, but I think reading one that was really serious and crime-focused has been super enjoyable. If you haven't picked it up and are into that kind of thing, I highly recommend it. I'm hoping to get through volumes 5 and 6 during February, so look forward to more updates for that. And the last 2 books that I read were The Hope of Elantris and The Emperor's Soul, both of which are short stories that take place in the Cosmere. The Hope of Elantris focuses on what happens in Elantris, close to the end, and without giving spoilers, I really can't tell you what happens. But it did fill in a plot hole, not necessarily a plot hole, but a period of time in the book that I really wanted to know what happened in a different perspective, so that was really interesting and I really enjoyed that. It's also fairly short. I think it was 25 pages, but it filled in some gaps and I really enjoyed that. The Emperor's Soul is a short story that takes place on the same planet as Elantris. It centers around a main character who who's in prison at the beginning of the story and is given the opportunity to basically escape her imprisonment by helping the emperor of this particular country. Her ability is soul stamping, and that's a really interesting magic system that is described throughout the book. I really enjoyed, I think that was the most interesting thing to read about as part of this book. She uses that ability to basically completely recreate the Emperor's soul after it is shattered. And at the beginning of the story, she's not super sure she's going to be able to do this. So she's basically just trying her best. Of course, she's telling people she can do it. Otherwise, they would not let her out of prison. And there's some really interesting castle politics that go on during this story as well. I think this was roughly about 100 pages, and it was pretty enjoyable. I did end up rating this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Alright guys, so that's everything that I read during the month of January. I can't even handle how much I read. I'm already a quarter of the way through my yearly goal, and it's the beginning of February. So if I continue on this trend, I am going to blow 60 books out of the water, and I might actually read a full 100, which I've never done before, which would be super cool. Comment down below and let me know what you read in January. Always looking for new book recommendations. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye!